On one of the most sacred holidays in the Jewish faith, a gunman burst into a synagogue in California and used a semi-automatic rifle to gun down worshippers when they were at their most vulnerable. The 19-year-old suspected shooter had allegedly planned his fatal attack for weeks. His motivations outlined in a manifesto that celebrated the mass shootings at a Pittsburgh synagogue and 2 mosques in New Zealand. John Earnest is accused of carrying out what authorities say can only be described as a hate crime, attacking people in a sacred place on a sacred day. The shooting at a house of worship on the final day of Passover comes at a time of rising extremism in Canada and around the world.
We cannot simply stand by. We can and we must do more to build a coordinated global response and prevent extremists from inciting violence and spreading hatred.
Police in San Diego say Earnest left behind an anti-Jewish manifesto filled with racist rants. City News has chosen not to release it. But in the document, Earnest praised the suspect accused of killing 11 people in a hail of bullets at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue in October. And he wrote he was inspired by the suspected white supremacist who killed 50 people in a violent Islamophobic attack on mosques in Christchurch last month.
We're aware of his manifesto, which we're in the process of reviewing to determine its validity and authenticity.
The Jewish human rights group B'nai B'rith tracks cases of anti-Semitism in Canada and says they've been on the rise for the last 5 years.
Anti-Semitism is certainly moving online more so than anywhere else, but online threats can have very real-world ramifications. We've seen in Canada, well, again, fortunately we haven't seen it in the form of a direct attack like we saw yesterday in San Diego. We're seeing a resurgence of swastika graffiti. We're seeing a resurgence of rhetoric and content that brings back to mind, 1930s Nazi-style propaganda.
1 person was killed in yesterday's shooting and 3 others wounded, the youngest an 8-year-old girl. Corin says the latest violence is a culmination of the Jewish community's worst fears.
When these type of attacks take place, this wasn't an attack just on Chabad of Poem or an attack on San Diego. This was an attack on every Jewish person in the world. We all feel this because it could be us.
Today, the New York Times apologized for an anti-Semitic cartoon that appeared in the newspaper's international edition, which I won't show. But B'nai B'rith says the cartoon is the kind of propaganda that is dangerous for the Jewish community. Tomorrow in Ottawa, the organization will discuss its annual audit of hate crimes targeting Jewish people. It says in 2018 there were more anti-Semitic incidents reported than ever before since it started compiling that data.